we have in the house with us Manny St. Victor or St. Vincent and Craig Calvert.
Right the first time.
Victor, yeah, V word. Sorry about that. You're just Manny to me, Manny.
That's good by me.
So we have Manny in the house who doesn't have a last name. And, of course, my sidekick, Stephanie. And you got to show off this shirt because we adopted something new this week.
Okay, so this is for everybody who's wondering what time we start the show. Actually, it's... Oh, go ahead.
It's 5:42 somewhere.
And I know exactly where my towel is.
And Stephanie is frozen. Awesome. So, yeah, we've been getting a lot of flack, so we decided that, yes, in fact, even though it's not true at all, we did actually decide to start at 12:42 as a hat tip to the... what's the book again? Wow, brain fart.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, Hitchhikers. We were talking about it in the green room, too, and I just went blank.
You've already unlearned it. You're getting a jump start on unlearning.
Yeah, well, seeing that I have ADD, I have a massive jump start on unlearning.
Everything's a benefit from the right perspective.
That's right. So, okay, so Stephanie is apparently completely frozen. So we are going to go ahead and start off our little introduction. So this week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start off and ask Craig to explain why he thinks that Manny is a great superhero for this week's episode on learning. And Stephanie is back.
Well, first, we're glad to have Stephanie back.
And then after you, Craig, we'll have Manny tell why he selected you as your sidekick.
I can't wait to hear that answer. All right. So one of the things about Manny, when you're talking about someone who's a true polymath, in the sense that you can toss 10 new subjects at him that he's never seen before, and within 3 days he'll be able to do a 2-hour hangout acting like he's known it his entire life. There's a skill involved. It's not just learning, but Manny is very interested in meta-learning, learning how to learn, strategies for learning no matter what it is that you're trying to absorb. So that's how Manny rolls.
Perfect. Manny.
So why did I pick Craig as my sidekick?
Yeah.
Well, that was a fascinating answer.
It was. That was
brief.
Amazing.
It was brief and to the point.
Concise.
Yeah. I was noticing that his backdrop wall would fit in my office. It's the right color. Like I don't have enough.
Some people find the yellow intimidating. There's Manny. Let's see how his machine does this time around.
Stephanie, are you frozen again? Oh, no, I saw your hand move.
No, I'm here. I was in twice, and so we were just having all kinds of fun. I was going to talk to myself, and I had a whole thing planned, but it just didn't work out. Sorry. I'll have to try again next week.
Well, I'm in twice. See?
Yes.
I'm over there, and I'm over here.
Google is apparently having some mood disorders today.
So, Craig, why don't you tell us why Manny picked you as his sidekick?
There you go.
Well, what's interesting, since this is what you do professionally, of determining people's personality type down to a very deep level, like what's their number one cognitive tool, number two, number three, number 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And Manny and I are carbon copies of each other in that sense. We are both part of a somewhat rare type that makes up approximately 3% of the population. So we think or don't think the same way, depending on how you want to look at it. And we both love dancing with 1,000 subjects to say a 90% level than doing lifelong dedication to one particular topic. And we think that both perspectives have value. Like, we have to have the people that love to dive into a topic and just exhaust a particular topic. Otherwise, Manny and I would have nothing to dance around. I mean, that's the relationship that we have with learning, is that we love absorbing large amounts from things that are seemingly disconnected. And Manny, is your computer, adjusting to?
Is my computer unlearning?
Yeah.
Yep. So am I saying why you're my sidekick of choice?
Well, you can see, because I had to guess. So,
Thank you. And that's why you're my sidekick of choice. Craig and I share a brain, is why he's my sidekick of choice. Like, when we met, we've been sprinting and gliding together and flowing together for years now. Seems like forever. And when I need to put this down because it's too heavy, I can hand it off and be like, hey, Craig, I have this thought that I can't get quite conscious. Are you free? And he'll be like, sure. We hop on a hangout, and I'll do a brain dump, and he'll be like, so are you saying such and such, such and such back? And I'm like, duh, that's what I said. And of course it wasn't what I said, but that's the nature of our friendship as long as I can remember. So when I started diving into mathematical models of mind, Craig already had been doing the psychometrics to make it work, where I'd be like, okay, well, someone has a moment of, what are some of the best ones? Knowledge instinct is one of the things that we were passionate about. Cognitive dissonance, which is when your brain has two things to hold and they don't fit together. And he was like, well, there's a mathematical model for that there. I'm like, so I'm not crazy. And our friendship blossomed based off the concepts of when I was seeing some incongruence in the neuroscience research that I've been taught. It was at the time when Craig was seeing some work in rational choice theory that was falling apart as far as sociological data. And that's the point at which we said, well, what if there wasn't a single model of cognition? What if you take the core model and you change it based on personality and you put that within rational choice theory? And then we were like, okay, so what if each person in a group didn't have one software, but had a base piece of software based on A, identity, B, personality? And then we landed Myers-Briggs, Jungian archetypes, and we've been in lust ever since. Bromance, full effect. I think that answered it.
I love it. Bromance in full effect. That's nice.
Yeah. There's a BBD song, I could do Poison by Belle Biv DeVoe for you, but it'd be awkward.
But everyone
I like the
along.
idea. I like the idea. I want to see this.
As soon as I get my overalls with one strap and, my T-shirt to the backwards, crisscross will be good for you.
Yes, that'd be perfect. No glasses, though. You would have to take the glasses off.
I would, because violent dancing and glasses don't go well.
Yeah, you're going to have to grab your toe and jump through the loop with the other foot, man.
I've got video of me doing that in 1989. That's the only time you'll see me do that and get up.
Yeah, I think we need to have that put up on YouTube.
Yeah, I'll dig it up.
All right, Stephanie, where are we going from here? Because this is really, you know what? We didn't get on the rails before we got off the rails today.
There are rails?
Yeah.
Rails are for cowards. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, we really need for the ones on this side. We don't need rails. We just need kind of bumper pads. That's how we roll.
I'm familiar with the concept of padded rooms, especially working in the psych inpatient unit. So bumper pads, some people call them bumper pads, some people call them love cushions.
Sometimes now that I've got these sound baffles in my room, I feel like I'm in a padded room. These things are really soft and, yeah, I'm going crazy.
It'll be a colorful ride, though. till the wheels fall off.
That's it's not a white padded room.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that Manny mentioned when we made the trailer, which was way back on Monday, seems like a long time ago, was this notion of unlearning, and you brought it up too, Craig. And so since we're talking to business owners and we're talking about this idea of personality type and how it affects the way you learn, is there something that we as owners should know about ourselves so that we can unlearn what we need to unlearn? So give us some clues.
Okay, the first thing is we are swimming in a sea of cultural scripts, cultural narratives, which form our identities. Your personality determines what's called need for cognitive closure, how tight to the rails, to use the rail metaphor, you want to stick. Okay? Now, if you have a daughter who grew up in a household where they kept her tight to the rails, she might grab a Cinderella script and decide that her next step is to find herself a prince or to find herself someone to put on her glass slipper. Or you might have an ENTP daughter who is like, slipper my, and she just develops an identity based on her worldviews, her mathematical models, and just goes with it. So unlearning is about, if you use Erickson's psychology models, you have your identity, and you go through phases of trying on different identity glass slippers, so to speak. Now, a person who's closer to the script, it's each time they try on a glass slipper, it's frustrating, it's exhausting, it's sort of awkward when it doesn't fit. A person who doesn't mind being in that hover space between can be like, well, no shoes for me, I'm a butterfly, and it's less stressful not being on the rails of the cultural script. Like, and your personality is essentially a large part of that. Your value system is high need for closure or low need for closure. That's the main thing. If you have a low need for closure, you're open to exploration, which is a high dopamine state of, look, squirrel, and you don't hate yourself for liking the squirrel. Whereas other people want to be nailed to the concepts, and they look at the squirrel and they've dishonored themselves and their family. That's the unlearning.
If I could even add, like, here's a very tangible, like for people that aren't even familiar with like the complexities of personality type, we all know the difference between an aerial view of something and a ground view of something. Like at the ground view, you can see you're gathering the details. You can't see the big picture from the ground, but you can see all the details very easily. And then aerial view, you can see the patterns, but the details get lost. And what the research clearly shows is that there's a spectrum of people that are all the way from hardcore aerial, doesn't even know the ground is in existence in the first place. And then you have people on the other end of the spectrum that are incredibly detail-oriented and zoom in on things, but are not as skilled at the big picture. And it turns out with learning, if you learn the way that most people were taught to learn, there could be a directional mismatch. It could be where you're being the learning tools that you're using. Let's say that you're someone who's detail-oriented, and Manny and I are the ones that wrote your textbook. Well, we're going to be coming at you with big picture all the time. You are not going to learn as effectively. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, Manny and I are on the spectrum where it's big picture first, then detail. Other people, you got to present the information in an opposite direction for them to be happy. And there's even weird types, and I feel for them in school because they're the ones that get yelled at. There's one particular type, it's ESFJ. You don't have to worry about the specifics on that one, but their focus level is highest when they're looking out the window.
Like literally?
Like literally, if there are trees, if there's a nature scene outside, if there's something out the window while the teacher is talking, this particular type has a higher level of focus and remembers more while they're looking out the window. If you say, Billy, back over here, eyes on me, he looks like he's paying more attention, but he's not. And so, yeah, this is what we mean about, unlearning, is that you have to make sure that the way that you've learned to learn is compatible with your brain, your software.
Yep. Another example is where I used to teach high school with kids that were gifted with special needs. So society were labeling them on numbers. They were acing these tests. I mean, these were cats that like had Harvard credentials. Yet when you put them in a normal school, a mainstream school, they would not let them use headphones while learning. A bunch of kids, when you put music in the background, their working memory becomes that much wider, because their verbal working memory increases with music for a lot of kids. There were other kids that needed a smoke break. There were other kids that just needed you to leave them the heck alone with a book. And our culture isn't wired for that. So I think our culture overall needs to develop the ability to unlearn constraining different brains with one way of working. And the brains that have been tortured through the one pathway system need to unlearn the self-esteem damage that interferes with their ability to move forward by discovering their own learning style.
Okay, so it sounds like what we need to do first is figure out what works best for us, right? So figure out where we are. You know, do I do better when I see the big picture and then I dive to the details? Do I need to know the details and then build the big picture?
Yep.
Is there, I mean, I know you guys love Myers-Briggs and I'm a big fan of it as well. Is that the only tool? Is that the best tool? Or is there some other way through just asking ourselves some questions that we can get to that conclusion?
We have a short evaluation that we've put together that we're polishing right now that is able to get at your core value system. So, which is your inner compass. Once you know your core value system, from there you're able to build the rest of your motivation structure, your curiosity structure, and your avoidance structure.
Okay, and so once we know what works best for us, a lot of people in our audience are either solopreneurs or, you know, they have a very small team. So already going out and trying to get someone to help them is a very risky proposition, both financially and, you know, personally. Are there some tips that you guys could give them so that they match up with the right people? Like you guys said you were both the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so that seems to work for you. But should we be looking for people who are like us, or should we be looking for people who are different than us?
Depends.
How do we use that? It depends. Come on, Manny.
No, I'll tell you why it depends.
There's a follow-up. He'll explain. Don't worry.
Yeah. Craig and I have synergy, but Craig and I also have a synergy for the same blind spots. When you put two people with the right mind together, well, anytime you put two minds together, the third mind emerges. This is basic think and grow rich type stuff. But when you put two minds that are the same together, we enhance each other, we resonate together, and we're like, and we think we've solved it. No, there's a blind spot there. What you want to do is, and I'll throw one of my favorite ESTJs out there, Carmen Rojas. I like when Carmen's around because Carmen can be a good anchor for us. We'll be up here, and Carmen will be like, reality, look. You know, and then we're like, oh, okay, we'll be right back, and we come back down to the brass tacks and we get it done. Yet she gets to enjoy, you know, sort of the helicopter ride, you know, and since she trusts us enough in our relationship, she doesn't worry that we're gonna drop her in the middle of bullcrap. You know, like usually when we go up 30,000 feet, Carmen's like, okay, so we're going back down soon. Sure, I'm okay up here, but how does this relate? And we keep each other kind of tethered to reality while still not being too much trees, not enough forest. So that's what you want to look for. You want to look for someone who, cognitive habit-wise, when it's crunch time, they default to what you don't.
Okay, and it's interesting that you got around there because I have a different way of expressing it, but I think that what we're talking about, these blind spots, are things that I call the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
You know, the famous Donald Rumsfeld speech, there's the known knowns, there's the known unknowns, but what really scares me are the unknown unknowns.
Yes.
So it's not the things that you don't know, it's the things you don't even know that you don't know.
Yeah, the ones you're not even conscious of.
Right.
Cognitive blind spots are found with everyone. I mean, like this is not correlated to intelligence. The most intelligent person in the person has cognitive blind spots. The least intelligent person in the world has cognitive blind spots. And it comes down to there's 4 basic categories, which it would be too difficult to go into the specifics on this one, but let's just take it as a given that there are 4 categories of mental processing, of cognition. And just like we're either left-handed or right-handed, and we way prefer one hand over the other, we have mental tools that our brain has decided in sort of a similar fashion that we're going to default to this bucket. And everyone uses 2 of the 4 buckets almost exclusively. So every time you're making a decision, you're seeing it through the lenses of only half of the available perspectives. And that's a specific danger for businesses, obviously, because if Manny and I don't have other resources that we go to help evaluate decisions, well, we're evaluating it with intuition. You might have noticed that we're brainstorming people. We use lots of metaphor, and we're big picture people. And we love logic. But if we don't have people like Cheryl and Dennis who bring a feeling perspective, this other side where there's logic and there's this whole other way of looking at stuff, it's difficult for us to see that we're not even seeing it.
Yeah.
We had a feeler analyze our site and said, did you realize that you don't have any pictures of real human beings on your site?
But we have brains. It's about brains.
Yeah. So that's something that another set of eyes told us, and it fixed. Well, we're in the process of fixing it, but it showed us we had a problem we didn't even know we had in marketing, in presenting our ideas to other people.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Can we? I know you don't want to get too in depth into them, but basically the 4
Mandy and I want to get in depth, but sundown's coming up.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about what the 4 are. So I heard intuition, logic, feeling, and
sensing.
Thinking. Well, sorry. We'll start from the beginning. There's sensing, which is detail and facts oriented.
Okay.
There's intuition, which is big picture, pattern seeking oriented.
Okay.
There's thinking, and I don't like the word, but it's already been chosen in the field, so it's not my fault. That's objective logic. That's like spreadsheet thinking.
That's me then. Okay.
And then feeling is the subjective assessment. That's like values and thinking about impact on multiple people, and almost like running a simulation software from multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you're thinking organizational, your thinking would be KPIs, and your feeling would be core value alignment for the organization. So if you're thinking about a collective executing those same decision-making processes. Okay.
And so again, if I see those elements, and the question is, as someone who works for themselves and maybe doesn't have access to a big team and doesn't have the capacity to process, is this person a thinking person or a feeling person or whatever, are there some places that we could maybe just educate ourselves so that we ask the right questions?
We got tons of videos on it. I mean, we did a set based on what's the use of personality types in business, and then we did four. I think each video is like an hour long, called the deep dive into personality type, which introduces each of the 4 functions, the 4 cognitive functions, and how to use them. This is where, like in psychiatry, we say that the best way to tell who's going to get well is to look for insight. The insight takes the known unknowns, the unknown unknown, across from subliminal to superliminal, so that now they are known unknowns. Oh, I never knew, I didn't know that. So now you don't put stuff over it, because now when someone comes with that skill, you're able to take some time to unlearn where you had misattributed to that part of your knowledge. And you're like, oh, that's the wrong tool. Let me take my wrench back. Show me how that drill thing you have there works. And you back up, and you're able to map that person's problem-solving style into your problems for next time. Either you go to them, or you tread lightly and kind of sketch out the answer and hand them a pencil drawing and say, check my homework. And we did a video on that called Strategic Humility, which explains sort of that thinking. It's a matter of knowing what you're good at and knowing when to be quiet. One of the models that we've put together is called the Ricochet Rubric, which involves a 4-step thinking process where you do it as a collective with 4 trusted people. It's really good for a mini mastermind group. And it goes from subjective assessment to, well, it goes from sensing to intuition, then to objective assessment, and then to subjective assessment, checking values. If you stop at step 3, you make what's called the Abercrombie mistake, where you tell your audience, we don't want fat people wearing our clothing. Sure, that's what the data says, but there's a different way of phrasing that. You know, that you want to phrase your message so that it fits the values that you espouse. Yeah.
And so to your question, there is sort of a, you know, like a what would Jesus do approach that you can take with this one, where there's like, here are like we have a workshop where, like, for sensing, it's the kinds of questions that people that have a sensing preference naturally ask. And so you can force yourself to go, even though this stuff it wouldn't normally be part of my thought process, you could even have an individual do the ricochet rubric, because they can slow down and go, all right, I'm going to force myself to work through these questions that a sensing person would do.
Right.
And if you're an intuition type and you see the intuition box, you're probably like, well, I've already asked these questions. These are the things that came to me immediately. You know, future possibilities, and are there new ways of solving this? Is there a different approach we could take? You start getting, you know, with me and Manny, the feeling questions of, like, how would this impact others, and how does this fit into, you know, a value system? And we understand the questions.
Yeah.
But in any given decision, if we're moving fast and we're not being mindful, those questions don't pop up. We have to teach ourselves to ask these questions as a matter of a habit rather than something that just flows naturally.
Yeah, and what happens is, after you've had a group of 4 people where each of those people defaults to one of the core positions, by habit, by putting them in sort of a distributed leadership structure where you tell the sensing person, it's your time to shine, everyone else put on your mute hat or duct tape, whatever it takes, and you get used to making that 4-step decision cycle, and you see it over and over, you internalize it, and then when you're away from somewhere, you can tell when you hit that what would have initially been a blind spot, usually that would have normally been a unknown, you're like, hey, maybe I need to call in a lifeline or something. Hey, I have a question for you. You know, you call a friend, you're like, hey, how does this sound to you? And they'll be like, oh, it sounds crude, and you're like, but that's what the model says. Yeah, but any model has 30 different narratives that could go with it, and what you want is, once you're at your model stage, you go to someone who is aligned with everyone in the organization's values, or in your friend circle's values, and you're like, this is the model. What does it sound like when it comes out of your mouth? You know, and then they get the messaging right, because otherwise you offend people saying something that you're like, well, it's obvious. Sure, it's obvious, but there's a big difference between, as Craig and I, when we first met, he said, the difference between touched by an angel and felt by an angel. You know, one of those offends. You know, one is a nice, warm, fuzzy show. You want to, you know, it's the difference between please be quiet and shut up. Both of those the goal is, I want less noise in the room, but the word you put to it determines the valence and the outcome.
Stephanie looks like she's frozen again. Yep, she's frozen.
Either that or we were particularly profound.
Yeah, I think that's it. She's just processing.
Well, there's an image that I'm gonna bring up here.
Okay.
Because it goes to why we need to unlearn. Like, what's the reason that we need to unlearn? This is a famous psychological experiment. It's called the candle problem. And yes, that's a candle. And here's what groups of people were told to do. And they were timed in how quickly they could solve this challenge. Your goal is to affix. We have to get the candle off the table. We have to light the candle, and the wax cannot drip onto the table. That's the challenge. Now, since research shows that it takes longer to solve this problem in a group than we probably have for this hangout, I'll go ahead and tell you what the solution is. The solution is that you take the tacks out of the box, you tack the box to the wall, and then you put the candle in the box and then light the candle. But here's why most people have a difficult time solving this challenge. It's a concept called functional fixedness. We see a box there that's holding tax. And so in our minds, it has become
The tack holder.
a tack holder. It doesn't have another function. Its function has already been decided. The tacks are in the box. What's interesting is that if you do this experiment where there's a pile of tacks and then a box and a candle and matches, people solve this challenge much faster, because if you do a Google on the candle problem, there's all kinds of articles on this particular psychological experiment. It's been repeated in a variety of environments. But one of the biggest problems that we have as individuals with lifelong learning is we've got to find, where do we have functional fixedness? What is something that's in our work environment? What's the solution that's right in front of us that we're saying, oh, well, that already has a function. That's already doing something, instead of deconstructing everything and realizing that you can break things apart and put them back together in a whole new way.
And that's the concept of unlearning. You unlearn what has been attributed to some tool in your environment so that you can learn a new use of it. And that's from people to tools to spices in your meals. If you don't take the assigned lump, the chunk, if you break it apart to find the use of the pieces, then you're able to learn way faster.
Well, and I'd also point out that you have to go through a rather exhaustive process, whether it's with a professional or on your own in self-study, to even learn where you would think, it's like, well, if I want to know which right-handed or left-handed, let's see, which one do I start writing with? Or when I fall, which one do I? It's easy to determine right hand and left hand. You start getting inside, and it's not so easy for people to self-assess that they're better at intuition than in sensing. Our own internal narratives, they tend to make us think that we're either awesome at everything, or it's the opposite, where we're too humble and we think that we're not good at anything. When the truth is, we're really good at about half of what the brain can do, and each of us brings a different dynamic to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you're talking about the difference between action. For example, in our physical bodies, as you mentioned, Craig, it's super easy. You don't have to think about, oh, I need to write something. Let me pick up the pencil with my right hand. And I think what's interesting is, because I think it might relate to this quote, which, thank you, Cheryl, for bringing this quote to our attention. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. And I've heard it said a couple of different ways. I've heard it said, show me or teach me as well. Not teach me, show me, or have me do it. So what do you guys think about the notion of the importance of taking action? So you can have the habit to think about it, but do you have to put it into practice so that you can actually use it?
Yes, and I'm going to use the concept of mirror neurons for this. And we did a session on this as well with my mentor, and who taught me, Dr. Ritvo, about this. What happens is, when you see something done that you've done before, the parts of your brain that do the thing fire off. When you see something done that you've never done before, zwap, whatever. So if you've walked through a session of the Ricochet rubric where you've gone through the 4 sets of thinking, where you've had this gap in your thought process, later on when you're alone, you go through the 4 process. You imagine someone doing the intuition part, and even through the weak act of imagining, even though they're not there, you're firing off the intuition part of your mirror neuron system through the social learning. So when you get involved in the cycle, you internalize it, you take it with you. And thought is really, outgoing thought is action, as far as I'm concerned, because it hits your premotor cortex. So it's simulation of the action. It's preparing for the action. It's preparatory.
Well, and just, oh, go ahead, Craig.
Well, I was just going to point out some research that's actually been done in this area within education. It had to be done in a private school because it's actually you can't do personality type assessment of public school students. It's not allowed for a variety of reasons.
Right.
I mean, it's ethical to do it to assess kids. It's not that but you can't do it in a public school environment. However, in a not public school environment, there was an experiment that was done of teaching teachers rather exhaustively the concept of personality type and these different cognitive tools and how to incorporate them into instructional design. Not changing what you teach, but adding some different things into how you present it based on the personality types that were found in the classroom. And then, of course, the control was the teacher did not know anything about the personality type of the students. The failure rate on the exams was cut in half with the group that had instruction matched to personality type. There's a huge quantifiable impact when you match how you learn with how your brain likes to take in information. And there's different tools out there for language. Let's take language acquisition. If you need to in your business to learn Spanish, well, if you are an intuitive type, not a sensing type, but an intuitive type, you're probably going to love Duolingo. I don't know if you ever heard of Duolingo, but it's this gamified sort of rails-off learning environment. I mean, things can come at you in almost any order, and over time you build up sort of this wax-on, wax-off expertise. But if you are not the intuitive type, if you're of a different, so the opposite type of us, you get into Duolingo and there's a frustration that sets in. It's like, but I need to see a grammar table. I need to see lists. Then that's the tool. You can't just go, oh, I've heard Duolingo is awesome. I need to learn Spanish. And they've got an 86% approval rating. It's the highest rated tool. Well, yeah, but it's the highest rated tool for a subset of the population. It's not for everybody.
Yeah, well, and I think that is kind of where I was going, so it's great that you gave us that example. How much of your ability to kind of integrate these 4 elements of the Ricochet rubric is based on how well it succeeds, meaning positive reinforcement. If you have a lot of people talk about this kind of from anecdotal experience. If you do something for the first time and you have a great experience, I think your chances of repeating that new thing and continuing to use it are a lot higher than if you do something for the first time and it's a spectacular failure.
Yeah. And here's where the unlearning comes in again. A spectacular failure means you didn't stop along the way to get feedback until the very end when it had melted down into a pile of mush. Because if along the way you had micro feedback events, you would have been steered towards the right outcome early. Because most people start to hint when you're doing something wrong if they're in a healthy relationship with you. If you want to ignore it and continue to plow forward headstrong, then at some point you'll get a...
Oh, Google, what a harsh mistress she is.
Boy, we have done something to anger the gods today. I'm not sure what it is, but that's okay. We are going to persevere.
And to your question, one of the things that we find fascinating when we take people through this process is that the simulation, even on the individual level, of I'm going to go through the steps that a person with a different set of tools, would do. I'm going to ask those. It's actually a lot easier than it sounds. The thing is, it's just not something that we think to do. I didn't say that that people only had 2 of the four tools. It's just that they only use 2 of the 4 tools. There's a speed thing. All of us love for our brains to do things quickly, and we like to stick with tasks that happen with minimal effort and so on. Well, it turns out your number 1 tool, super fast. Your brain loves to do it. There's a joy that comes from it. Number 2, we're still doing pretty good. Number 3 is where there's a bit of a drop-off in speed and skill level. And then number 4 is just useless. It's You know, it's writing with the crayon between the toes of your non-dominant foot. It just doesn't work very well. But think about it. If I told you you had to write your name with crayons beneath, in between your toes and your non-dominant foot, you'd be able to do it. It's a skill you could acquire if you wanted to, if you had a need to do it. Your first attempt would look awful, and your 100th attempt would be like, I think that's sort of Stephanie looking.
That's a cat, you mean? Okay, no problem. Well, and I find that interesting because what it says to me is it says that the link, which you've both told me before, and it's just now clicking. Sorry, I'm slow. The link between identity and how we react to those situations is where things go wrong. Because, like you said, if somebody is not able, in terms of who they are, to accept being bad at something, because they say, forget it, I'm bad at that, and I'm just not going to try.
Yeah.
It's much harder for them, because then what they've done is they've not accepted the notion of 4 tools, or 4 toolkits, if you will. They're like, nope, I got 2 toolkits, and that's all there is in the world. If it's over there, there's something wrong with it. Is that is that kind of the link?
Well, there are people that do that in business.
Yeah.
The number one type found in the corporate world, in the management layer, is a particular type. Yeah, it's ESTJ. They're way overrepresented in management. And one of the interesting things is that the mental tool that's number 1 for Dennis, the feeling function, is the worst tool. It's the inferior, the weak tool for the ESTJ. And here's what they do. They set up defense mechanisms in business. They'll be like, save the drama for mama. Let's get back to business. They'll say these things to strip away any emotional content and bring it. Yeah. And they're shutting down. Yeah. But think about the things that leaves out. I mean, think of the
emotional intelligence.
It leaves out, it totally leaves out value alignment, emotional intelligence, running through unintended consequences of messaging and branding decisions.
Abercrombie mistake.
Well, and could that be a big part of the reason that big brands are having so much difficulty translating to social media? Because in social media, not only the need for the one-on-one connection, but you have to be flexible. You encounter a lot more people, and so you have to be able to adapt to all those who have feeling as their principal function. Yeah,
and a lot of times what's ironic and kind of clever as far as how evolution works in a physical scale is that usually in your community, it's not the guys that are really good with the numbers that go viral. No one wants to really be around someone pushing math in their face all the time, but they'd much rather hang out with Cheryl and hear a good story. So when you shun Cheryl at the interface with your management, you're screwed. Because people with high feeling function are into harmony in the group. If someone feels left out, they go and they get that person. And guess who that person is going to be most evangelical about? The people that brought them in. So when here you are looking at your numbers and you're being dismissive to the members of your team that have a high alignment of values with the community that you've attracted, the community is not there for the outcome. The community is there for what it means emotionally and symbolically to use your brand. So you've insulted those people. Now the ethos from within is emanating outside the walls of the org because your people are feeling kind of run down and they're projecting that into the marketing sphere, whatever. And so the other feelers coming in there and they're like, this is a company that, says fat people shouldn't wear their clothing. And that's not going to work.
It's a big learning experience for companies in the sense that the things that help business succeed in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, before there was this social connection element, the feeling function was almost irrelevant during that period.
Yeah.
Because it was about shareholder returns and efficiency and productivity. You add this whole new era of social business, and the people and the decisions and policies that they've had in place, the teams that they built, if they're not learning how to embrace these types of people that they used to would have even bothered hiring, that now they need to actively involve them in major decisions. This is a whole different literally a different mindset.
We're not sprinting anymore. The information is sprinting, but we're not. This is a marathon. This is long term. This is true customer loyalty with integrity and authenticity. You don't just get to pretend to be environmentally sound by using yellow and green, VP. The information doesn't take generations to travel now. When you flood and kill a bunch of birds, we know almost immediately.
Yeah, well, okay, so yeah, I see what you're saying, and I think you're right about the changing role of how businesses communicate with their customers. But do you think that there's also been more of a, I don't know if I want to call it a backlash, but more of a positioning of the consumers? Because I think, in the 60s when we had all this advertising, if we go back to what Alex always tells us, that was broadcasting. That was, this is what you need to be, and to be this, you have to buy this product.
Yeah,
right? That was what advertising was.
Yeah. Back then, they used a model of lack, a model of need. Symbolic self-completion is what each human pursues. We want to be complete. Back in the day, they leveraged it, and this was the Edward Bernays period. Cognitive behavioral therapy rebranded as propaganda or public relations, where if you didn't have this car, they took 2 inches off your manhood, to use that metaphor.
Right.
That was very much a narcissistic approach. You need us. You need Tide. You need Macy's to represent that part of you. Now we have competitors where you don't need any particular one. The company has to come to you where in the hero's journey, you're not an object, you're the subject. You're the point of interest because the brand needs you as much as you need the brand. As David Amelin says, the reciprocity, there's a symmetry in power now where if I use your brand and I've given you, maybe even if it's my $2, you don't get to squash me as soon as I've given you $2, because if I turn around and you treat me badly or you don't represent what, when I give you my $2, you implied you represented, I'm telling everyone on Facebook, on Twitter, and whatever. And so it's a more symmetric relationship now. You will stand for what you told me you stood for, or you will not be recommended to my friends who trust me to stand for what I stand for when I use your thing symbolically.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, and there's part of what we see with the discussion about the A word, which we usually don't say here, but it's okay. The authenticity on social media is exactly what you're saying, because now that you've got the message coming through a second person, it's not coming directly from the brand, it's coming from the brand through someone that you trust, then the question is, okay, if this thing didn't work out the way I wanted, whose fault was it, right? Who didn't tell me the truth? Was it the person I trusted, or was it actually the brand?
Oh yeah, and there's a thing about killing the messenger. I mean, they don't say don't kill the messenger because people were not killing the messenger. They put that reminder in place for a reason. Okay.
That's true.
As a trusted influencer, you're the messenger.
Well, and something that, since we're talking about the outward message of a company, this is where you also have to unlearn some of the thoughts that we've had about marketing over the decades. Like, here's a very tangible example with a particular word. If you stuck an EEG cap on me or Manny, we're both the same type, and I'll pick INFP as the other, which actually is a Dennis's type. There's a word that usually lights up the brain of an INFP in sort of a little happy dance, and it creates a dissociative revulsion response in our brains. And here's the word: harmony. If the word harmony is in advertising, it will appeal to one particular group, and it actually repels another. Now, sometimes the words that we choose, it will really appeal to one, it will be neutral with another, and so it's still safe to use. But there's things to learn about in your marketing messaging about the sensing, the intuition, the thinking, the feeling, to make sure that you're using messages that sort of feed all four brains and doesn't repel too many. I mean, sometimes if you sell surfboards, it's okay to repel people that don't like the outdoors.
Yeah, but when you sell things that are being sold to someone who is married, and that thing has to be negotiated into a household with a spouse that doesn't need to be repelled by it, you need to make it that is neutral to the non-target psychographic.
Well, I think you were talking earlier about the language program, and I've never heard of the particular program that you brought up. The language learning program, if I'm understanding what you're saying right now, they actually would want to utilize words because that program is designed to work really effectively with a certain type of people, then they could actually benefit from using words that will repel. Not everyone can actually do that, but am I correct in what you guys are laying out here?
Yeah, in the case of Duolingo, I don't need my wife's approval to use Duolingo. I log on and I use it. Now, if it was a couch, a refrigerator, or even a bicycle for our son, that commercial better have a combination of practicality, which my wife likes, and his future and how that bike is going to make him into a neurosurgeon, all wrapped up into one happy semantic bubble. So it depends on the tool. If there's something that I'm going to use for when I go out with the guys, you want a little bit of repellent so that I can use it to symbolize, look, I bought this in spite of you. But if it's like going in our bedroom, ideally I wouldn't be on the couch for having brought it home.
Right.
You know? So it's all what do you want the person to feel like? You know, is this a chest-beating piece of software, or is it a, you know, honey, look what I got for us type of thing? You know, and if it's bought for us, it has to allow the guy to pretend he actually thought through the wife's point of view, because you didn't make it repel her, even though he didn't even think about it. Okay, if it's a we product,
right,
don't go in his blind spot and put shrapnel there. You know.
Well, but that's where the ricochet, that's where the taking into account all four of these things is so critical, because you know, if it's a bunch of guys that are sitting around and they're like, oh my god, this is the best product ever, I love it, and nobody sees that, the wife's going to be like, come over here and let me slap you. Because they
with a running start.
Yeah. Even with like the Shark Tank model, there's been more than one example of people that had a good product, they had a good business, but their presentation was focused on the wrong areas, and it cognitively shut down, and everybody went, no, I don't want to work with you. Right. I mean, this is the concept of cognitive hunger that we talk about, that if you are and this applies to small businesses when we're pitching our services and writing proposals to companies. Well, if Manny and I did not use our system and we sat down to write up a proposal, we would have lots of analogy, lots of metaphor, lots of aerial view, lots of look at the cool future possibilities, look where we can take this. The people writing the checks, well, if they're of the usual type of the check writers, the ESTJ, they're like,
that's performance.
Where's your numbers on? Yeah, past performance. What's your cost to acquire a customer? What's the lifetime value of a customer? What's your debt? You know, all these very, they're not sexy fun questions that occur to me and Manny. We're elsewhere.
I got a strange question.
Of course you have a strange question.
Of course I do, yes. Based on what you're saying right now, what on earth happened in the late 90s internet bubble?
ESTJ dominance.
But how?
Back in that period of time, information traveled differently. Okay, when you get a select group of stakeholders together, and that's the whole bubble concept. If you can create a cluster of people of like mind, and then they buzz together, it gets synergistic, and they're like, yeah. and they yeah to the point where even the people in the organization that have common sense or a difference of opinion, I mean, they're like, sure, yeah. When we assess organizations with the tools that we have, an organization develops a personality. The second you have two of the same personality in an org, in a position of power, the rest of the organization becomes yes men. And they're like, yeah, we're right. And everyone's like, yeah, you're right. And
go ahead, Manny.
And it rolls. You end up with people supporting. In abuse situations, you call it identifying with the aggressor. In Cubicle Nation, you call it keeping your job.
Well, and I think from a financial standpoint, what happened was there was a perception of some secret info, right? And so everybody was operating on the concept, kind of like Enron, right? Everybody was operating on the concept that the people who were telling you this, first off, were telling you the truth, because that is their obligation. But second, we're telling you everything you needed to know. And that's where things got a little fuzzy, which is why we have Sarbanes-Oxley and all kinds of other stuff. Because they weren't telling you everything you needed to know. They were telling you what made you feel good about saying yes.
Yeah. Now, the concept of descriptive statistics is that you abstract the mathematics to say something, leaving out certain parts. The concept of framing and confirmation bias, and Kahneman did a whole bunch about this in Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. There was a whole lot of thinking fast happening back then because the guys with the money were like, what's the decision? And your people with the feeling function were like, well, what Fred said. Sure. That's what I was. Go with it.
That mechanism right there is why. We talked about, like, we've been in companies that had where the management layer was, say 20 or 30, and we would find like 90% of the team all one type. This ESTJ, this particular type, they make super fast decisions. I didn't say super awesome decisions, but they are amazing at going bam, 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 spreadsheet says we do this, decision next. And so they naturally rise in the corporate environment.
Yeah, and then when they make a mistake, the whole team agreed that they had looked at the same sheets, so they kind of can do the denial, regret, reevaluation together. Okay, guys, and then they dive right into the next wrong mistake, wrong decision, because as a team, they all look like this is where we should go from here. And they're still in a position of, you don't want to be the one person that said, hey, guys, let's go that way, because then there'd have been a nice crucifixion after that.
We've got to unlearn that we are not all precious little snowflakes. We're not as unique as we think we are. That, yes, we may uniquely manifest our personality type, but our brain physiologies are remarkably predictable in the kinds of things that they'll do.
That's why we survived as a species, really.
Yeah. Well, and the one other observation, and then I know we need to wrap up. I just realized we're already at an hour. But the other thing that I think contributed as well was this notion of a lot of people, I think at that time, still had in their minds, I can have a job for life.
Yeah.
Right? We were in the generation where it's not, I'm going to go out and do my own thing. It's not, I'm going to live my life and have a good time. It was, I got to get the best job I can after college because that's where I am until I turn 65. Yep. And so that was a huge way for pressuring all those people who, like you said, Manny, had common sense and wanted to raise their hands, but said to themselves, I'm not going to sacrifice the next 20 years of my life to be the only guy who says this doesn't make sense. I'll just be quiet.
Yep. And that was the too big to fail era. Back then, a company could make mistakes and keep making mistakes and remain profitable or get bailed out. You didn't want to be the lone person that caused them to make a mistake that they couldn't justify that they ended up in court for, and everyone points to you in court. It was much easier to just fail and then go to the government and get more money. Right. Together, cohesively, following the protocol.
Yeah. Cool. Oh my gosh. So we've gone everywhere. We've been politics. We've been internet bubble. But I like this second quote, which we need to get to, and which I think may give us a great way of looking at what we've kind of learned today, no pun intended, from Yazin. He tells us that the best learning is when everything is simplified. So I kind of have mixed thoughts on that, but why don't you guys tackle it first, and then we'll see if we're all on the same page here.
The basic learning model is that you have to put something simple in there so that you can unpack the sub-elements. You know, we taught the kids Roy G. Biv. We didn't teach them wavelength, frequency, and, you know, electromagnetic radiation at different oscillations. Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, rainbow. Go see it, memorize it. And then you explain the possibilities under each sub-element.
Well, and I would point out that to even unpack the quote about simplicity is that you would think that that word is the same definition with everyone, but it's not. I see this whenever Manny and I, whenever we do our assessments. If we're assessing someone and we're doing a review of their results, and we got a lot of stuff to explain, we got to do an ENTP the other night, and it was effortless. We got to communicate like directly in very abstract, highly condensed analogy and metaphor that, because she was also another ENTP, unpacked it. And so the whole thing, we packed more into that hour than we normally could ever dream of picking. But with other types, I have to create a different kind of simple. It's not the same kind of simple. I can't do what Manny and I would consider to be a simple metaphor. Someone who doesn't have a brain that is expert at wielding metaphors may not see the connection between the two that's super obvious to us, and then we've lost whoever it is that we're trying to teach. We have to give ground level examples sometimes.
Could we say that simple is in the eye of the beholder?
Simple is
Yes,
in the brain of the beholder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what was it, 3-4 months ago that you guys went through the process of analyzing both Cheryl and I? And, you know, I haven't personally gone back to that video, but I keep thinking I need to go back to that video because, quite honestly, guys, most of it just kind of, right? But, man, when you said harmony, I'm like, yeah, you know. And you used the term referring, before you spoke of harmony, you used the term between the two of you. It was actually Manny used it, of harmonic resonance between the two of you. And I'm like, okay, I can see that. I see it when, you know, you guys are working together. I'm left outside of that harmonic resonance, but I can see it, right? And so I keep thinking, I got to go back. I know there's a ton of amazing information about me that I need to understand, and I need to reprocess it. But
one of the challenges is that if I were to critique that assessment, if I could go back and do it again, I could go back and do it in such a way that you would have found it more accessible. But I think if I had done that, I would have lost Cheryl. Because the thing is that both of you have a different orientation for the intuition function. It's a very technical point, but you have a different orientation. So the kind of intuition that Manny and I and Cheryl use is a different brand, a different flavor of intuition that you use. All of us are focused on pattern recognition, but the way that we communicate those patterns is very different.
Yeah. Now, one benefit is that once you heard the word harmony, and this is so demonstrative of what happens in classrooms. Once you heard the word harmony, your brain was like, hey, what? Now, if you go back and you listen to everything with the harmony context, everything will sound different now because you can put it into those models.
yeah, that resonates. Okay. Well, we are, as always, over. And so let's go ahead and close down with closing thoughts. Typically how we do this, Stephanie will give her closing thoughts and plug anything that she wants to plug. Stephanie, you know, you make it so hard when I explain that because, yeah, I just want to say it a different way. And
we've talked about this, Dennis.
I know. It's just, you know, it makes sense to me. In fact, you know what? I want to throw this out because I've got you guys on here. What we're talking about, if you haven't watched this show, I prefer to say pimp something. And it really drives Stephanie nuts. But as who you guys are, you're going to have a third thing you get to do. On top of closing thoughts and pimping something, I want you to explain why it is that that word works so well for me without being offensive, because I'm a very religious person.
It depends on where you put your meaning.
Right.
Originally, like some people, I think, Stephanie, you have an S type, right? A sensing type.
I'm an
Right.
INFJ. I'm an
Yeah,
INFJ.
INFJ? Okay, well, I think in somewhere in your structure, you kind of put high value on past meaning of things. You know, you nail stuff down for planning, and you like it to stay there, and that's what we're seeing there.
Maybe. I can explain to you. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, you're muted.
We lost Manny.
We lost
We can't hear you, Manny.
I was
Weird.
I was asking the household to mute the TV for 5 minutes so that I can close out instead of you guys enjoy the cartoons.
So
Yeah, when you build models in the past and you like them left in place, in the future state, new meanings come along for words. One example that we can use to introduce a little controversy in everyone's brain is the concept of gay marriage. People are like, well, don't put those two words together. I don't care what you're trying to accomplish, you know, because the word marriage has something that just doesn't go there. You know, some people get upset when you say the Bible of cooking. They're like, no, there's no Bible of anything. And pimping something is another example of that, where if when you hear the word pimp, you pull back a 1964 Shaft Superfly valence, there's not much you can say after that make it give it a sugar coating, because it's still sticky and pimpy. Okay? Whereas other people who have picked up the meaning, have followed the change in the meaning, have let the sort of negative valence evaporate from that word in their conceptual space.
There's also a gender valence going on here, because
yeah.
It's not a label that women have been given any cultural programming to take on.
Yeah. And I think
Oh, wait, time out. I learned my current usage of that one from Mia. I just got to point that out. That's the person that used it.
I wasn't suggesting that there isn't a woman out there that wouldn't use it.
Okay.
right.
But I am suggesting that it can play a role in whether or not there's a dissociative response to a particular word, much in the same way that there's been a bad run of people named Kevin among my sisters. I mean, it's just,
Right.
and so now whenever I meet someone named Kevin, I have to remind myself that you're not an evil person, that I have to like reshuffle the deck and treat you as somebody new. But I bring this emotional baggage with the word Kevin for some reason that I have to program myself around. And we all have different words that this can fall into. You know, that things that can pop up out of nowhere. That actually is where we actually do say that there's quite a bit not connected to personality type. There are some things that are purely rooted in life experience and amygdala response, you know, emotional responses to things. We all smell, we all hear things, we all touch things, you know, it's like this is all part of our experience. That part doesn't vary to type.
Right. Well, and I think it's also, I mean, we should wrap up because we're starting the whole discussion again. But I think part of what you're saying, Craig, is true. I think it's a gender difference. But I also think that for me, it's more a question of the type of relationship I want to have with what I offer. And to me, I don't want to have this notion of I'm out here pushing something on you, whether you need it or not.
That is totally a question that Manny and I would never ask in our heads. Like having that kind of question. That is a feeler question. Like to even have that thought is something that would almost only occur naturally, without any prompting, that is, in a feeler brain.
And so for me, that's where it comes from. It's not even the word itself. I mean, yeah, I don't like it. It's not a word I would pick. But it's the notion of, here I am pushing something on you that you don't want. And that's the part I don't like.
Manny and I used to refer to ourselves as drug dealers.
That bothers
because
me less.
of oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine. These are brain But there were too many people that, for obvious reasons, had to remind us that they have an association with drug dealer that they just were not going to let go of it. And so that was a perspective we had to go, oh, well, it might have been clever. It might have been wordplay, but it's repelling people, so don't use it.
And it's repelling the right kind of people. I think that's the key, right? If it was helping people self-select, then it would have been a good thing to keep using because you would only get the people who got that joke, if you will, or who saw it your way. But it was repelling the people that you actually wanted to work with. So
not so smart. So we changed.
I just have to point out, Ammon is pretty funny here. He says, hey, the guy who wears the loud hats indoors doesn't have negative association with pimp. Is that really a surprise?
Okay, so I'm gonna tell everybody my closing thoughts because otherwise.
Well, hey, curmudgeon, well played.
Yes, thank you for sharing that, Em, and I appreciate that. Okay, so my biggest takeaway from today is that, Dennis, this is for you, Dennis, that everyone needs to become a gearhead. And I mean that in the sense that we need to realize that there are 4 sets of toolboxes, which only a gearhead would appreciate. Most people think they're okay with 1 toolbox. Craig told us that most of us have 2, but we actually need to look at all 4 toolboxes and really get in there and understand there are more tools for the job than just what comes to mind as soon as we think about how to do the job. And that, to me, is the most important thing. I would like to tell anyone who is interested in what Manny and Craig have had to say today that you should go check out mindful360.com because these guys are smart. And I would actually like to ask you guys, if you don't mind, to put links to those 2 videos, use of personality types in business and strategic humility. If you'd stick those in the comments, that would be great because I think our audience would really get a lot of benefit from those.
We can do that.
Thanks, Stephanie. This whole show finally just made sense with that gearhead comment.
I'm here for you, Dennis.
Yeah. Okay. So, Craig, give us your closing thoughts in anything that you want to share.
Well, I'll make it as simple as possible because to me this is all about there is no self-improvement, and I consider learning to be one of the hallmarks of self-improvement. There is no self-improvement without self-awareness. And so if you don't take steps to be self-aware, then you're wasting your efforts in the self-improvement. You could be working like crazy, but if you're working on from the wrong perspective, if you chose the wrong pathway based on what your brain really needs, then it's going to be for naught.
Okay.
That sounded depressing and somber now that I reflect on it.
Manny.
I guess I'll go back to the learning is in large part unlearning thing. And to unpack unlearning is becoming aware that you don't have to tie everything that you do to your identity. If there's something that you don't like doing, you can work at not doing it anymore and finding the thing that you can do that you consider foreign. And you'll suck at it at first, but the more you do it, the more it will become part of what you do, replacing the part that you do now that you are killing yourself for. You know, you're not stuck with your identity. It's your right to adjust and grow your identity until it reflects your core.
Did you have something you wanted to say, Stephanie?
No, I was just giving a thumbs up because I do think that the link between identity and this willingness to try new things is crucial, but don't get me started. Go, Dennis. I've got a whole other show about that.
Yeah, we could keep going for a long time here, I'm sure. I really appreciate you guys coming on here. Everything that you're doing is such a huge fit with what Stephanie and I are trying to I call it the ethereal side of business, but you know, it was great to have you guys on. We're gonna have to get you on again.
Sure.
For something. We're still working on what next season will be all about, but Stephanie, if we go what we were talking about last time, I can see some major fits for these guys.
I'm up for
Oh,
it.
yeah, definitely.
All right, and next week we have Ammon joining us. We are going to be talking all about honesty next week. And I want to point out we've changed the questionnaire ever so slightly. You'll notice this really as we roll forward next week. We are just going to keep using the same questionnaire with minor changes. You only have to fill out the first 2 questions. Everything else is optional. Fill it out, don't fill it out. And all of those other questions are questions you've answered before, but we would love to hear and see how your thoughts change. We're actually going to be dissecting things even based on a who filled out the questionnaire. So don't look back on your previous answers, but feel free to answer because our analyst here is going to dissect the numbers at the end of the season. And we're going to have some pretty interesting insights by making it one longer questionnaire than we have been. And we didn't get a chance to go to the questions, but I will post the responses in the thread this afternoon. So, jump in. We love your feedback, and we're going to be using it for some bigger things now. We got some stuff on the horizon. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us on this week's Network Roundtable. We will see you all next week. Well, we'll see you Monday at 12:42 Utah time as we do our, well, I like to say it's the best 3-minute HOA on Google+. And we'll be talking about who our guest is going to be or who our sidekick will be, and then we'll see you next Friday. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
Take care.
Thanks.
Yes, y'all.